Okay, so we talked about carbohydrates, we talked about sugars, different types of sugars, monomers, polymers, monosaccharides, disaccharides, polysaccharides, glucose, sucrose, fructose, maltose, the importance of those. And now we are going to move into lipids. Lipids are the fats, and fats are, amazingly enough, very, very important. And your body cannot function without some fat in it. Obviously, you don't want too much, but you definitely need some fat. And fats are insoluble, so they're hydrophobic. Phobic, fear, hydro, water. But they're important to long-term energy storage because you take a gram of fat and a gram of a polysaccharide, and the fat will have twice as much energy in it. It's also important because they are lightweight, so they're good for long-term storage, and so if you think about birds migrating or whatever, using that fat is lighter. If it was too heavy, it would be harder to fly. So they're mostly carbon and hydrogen items linked together by nonpolar covalent bonds, and we'll get into there. And so there's oils on those feathers, and you can see how that's hydrophobic and that water beating up, and that helps keep the bird dry and repels water. So lipids are not massive molecules, and they're not built from monomers. And so they have a difference in structure and function. We'll talk about this as we get into this. And so we're going to look at three types. We're going to look at fats, phospholipids, and steroids. Steroids are something our body makes and something our body needs. And we'll have a small discussion on anabolics, steroids, and things like that. So a fat is a large lipid made from two kinds of smaller molecules, glycerol and fatty acids. So you have a fat will have a glycerol head and a fatty acid tail. And so those are linked by dehydration synthesis. And so a fat has one glycerol head linked to three fatty acid tails. And so they're often called triglycerides because of their structure. And so, that doesn't come through so well. So there's one fatty acid and there's a glycerol head, and it's linked together by dehydration synthesis. You pull that water out, and here's the tails. So if you're looking at this, and this is very, very important because you'll have to identify this on a test. This right here, there's a double bond. And that double bond is what makes that tail a bend. So we know this fat comes from a plant. We know that because there's a double bond. If there wasn't, it would have come from an animal. It would have been called a saturated fat. This is an unsaturated fat. So fatty acids that have one or more double bonds are unsaturated fatty acids. And fatty acids with double bonds are easier to digest and break down. And that's why unsaturated fat is sometimes better for you because it's easier for your body to use. And that's what causes that kink or bend. And you can't pack them together as tightly. And so they are liquid at room temperature. Think of your vegetable oil versus your butter at room temperature. The fats with all the hydrogen, no double bonds, are called saturated fats, and they are solid at room temperature. And so most animal fats are saturated, plants are unsaturated. When we say an oil is hydrogenated, and so they've taken the unsaturated fat and they've added hydrogen atoms, and so now they're saturated fat. And that creates a trans fat, and that is what's associated with health risk. But it tastes really good, so everybody likes it. Phospholipids are similar and they're the major component of all cells because they deal with the cell wall. Phospholipids, they have that same kind of structure. Three fats contained by glycerol, and the phospholipids contain two fatty acids. I reverse that. Fats have the three fatty acids to the glycerol. Phospholipids have the two fatty acids to the glycerol. I apologize for switching those. And there you are, your glycerol head and two fatty acids. And this is very important because one end is hydrophilic and the other end is hydrophobic. And so when you put them together, they beat up in a certain way and they can create cell membranes. And so there's your hydrophilic head and hydrophobic tail. That creates a bilayer, two layers. And so the hydrophilic heads are in contact with the environment and the internal part of the cell. And the hydrophobic tails come together in the middle of the bilayer. And this allows things to pass in and out of them fairly easily. And so it allows nutrients in the cell and out of the cell. And we'll talk about proteins and other things that do that as well. But it's important that you understand the hydrophilic and hydrophobic nature of those phospholipids and how they line up, because that's very integral to how a cell functions. So steroids are fats, but the carbon skeleton has 4 fused rings. And then cholesterol is commonly found in animal cell membranes, and that's what fats are made from, including your sex hormones. So that's your testosterone and your estrogen. So if you're not getting enough cholesterol, you can't make enough of those hormones. So here is your cholesterol, and that is turned into estrogen and testosterone. So anabolic build-up steroids are synthetic variants of testosterone. And this says it causes a buildup of muscle and bone mass. And it does that to an extent, but more importantly, it also helps repair muscle tissue. So someone taking steroids can go work out in the morning, and then his body will repair itself quickly. They can work out at night. Where someone without steroids would work out in the morning, and it would take a day or two for their body to repair. So someone with steroids could work out more, and so you often get this gain of muscle mass because that body repairs itself. It's often described to treat some diseases. There, of course, are side effects. Violent mood swings occurs in a small percentage of the people. Depression, liver damage, cancer, everything causes cancer. Just get used to it. High cholesterol, high blood pressure. So when they're abused, there can be some serious side effects. So here's some deity. I don't know if this guy's using steroids or not, but it helps build up muscle mass. So the question is that you should be thinking about is, should steroids be illegal? Some say yes, some say no. When we're dealing with professional sports, I mean, don't they know the risks they're going into? So they should be able to use it. Well, there's that side. There's also the side that, well, that's fine, but if they're using it and they have these violent mood swings, won't other people suffer because of it? And so on and so forth. And so, yeah, once again, each person has to decide for themselves what's right, what's wrong. But steroids, you now have kind of a little better idea about what's going on with the steroids.